Chapter 34. The Blue Train Again.
Please support by subscribing for more classic audiobooks.
The millionaire's train, as it is sometimes called, swung round a curve of line at what seemed a dangerous speed. Van Aldine, Knighton, and Poirot sat together in silence. Knighton and Van Aldine had two compartments connecting with each other, as Ruth Kettering and her maid had on the fateful journey. Poirot's own compartment was farther along the coach. The journey was a painful one for Van Aldine, recalling as it did the most agonizing memories. Poirot and Knighton conversed occasionally in low tones without disturbing him. When, however, the train had completed its slow journey round the Cincha and reached the Gare de Lyon, Poirot became suddenly galvanized into activity. Van Aldine realized that part of his object in traveling by the train had been to attempt to reconstruct the crime. Poirot himself acted every part. He was in turn the maid, hurriedly shut into her own compartment. Mrs. Kettering, recognizing her husband with surprise and a trace of anxiety, and Derek Kettering discovering that his wife was traveling on the train. He tested various possibilities, such as the best way for a person to conceal himself in the second compartment. Then suddenly an idea seemed to strike him. He clutched at Van Aldine's arm.
Mon Dieu, but that is something I have not thought of. We must break our journey in Paris. Quick, quick, let us alight at once.
Seizing suitcases, he hurried from the train. Van Aldine and Knighton, bewildered but obedient, followed him. Van Aldine, having once more formed his opinion of Poirot's ability, was slow to depart from it. At the barrier they were held up. Their tickets were in the charge of the conductor of the train, a fact which all three of them had forgotten. Poirot's explanations were rapid, fluent, and impassioned, but they produced no effect upon the stolid-faced official.
Let us get quit of this,
said Van Aldine abruptly.
I gather you are in a hurry, Monsieur Poirot. For God's sake, pay the fares from Calais, and let us get right on with whatever you have got on your mind.
But Poirot's flood of language had suddenly stopped dead, and he had the appearance of a man turned to stone. His arm, still outflung in an impassioned gesture, remained there as though stricken with paralysis.
I have been an imbecile,
he said simply.
Ma foi, I lose my head nowadays. Let us return and continue our journey quietly. With reasonable luck the train will not have gone.
They were only just in time, the train moving off as Knighton, the last of the three, swung himself and his suitcase on board. The conductor remonstrated with them feelingly and assisted them to carry their luggage back to their compartments. Van Aldine said nothing, but he was clearly disgusted at Poirot's extraordinary conduct. Alone with Knighton for a moment or two, he remarked,
This is a wild goose chase. The man has lost his grip on things. He has got brains up to a point, but any man who loses his head and scuttles round like a frightened rabbit is no earthly darned good.
Poirot came to them in a moment or two, full of abject apologies and clearly so crestfallen that harsh words would have been superfluous. Van Aldine received his apologies gravely, but managed to restrain himself from making acid comments. They had dinner on the train, and afterwards, somewhat to the surprise of the other two, Poirot suggested that they should all three sit up in Van Aldine's compartment. The millionaire looked at him curiously.
Is there anything that you are keeping back from us, Monsieur Poirot?
Poirot opened his eyes in innocent surprise.
But what an idea! Major Knighton, is the door of your compartment bolted? The door into the corridor, I mean.
Yes, I bolted it myself just now.
Are you sure?
Said Poirot.
I will go and make sure, if you like,
said Knighton, smiling.
No, no, do not derange yourself. I will see for myself.
He passed through the connecting door and returned in a second or two, nodding his head.
Yes, yes, it is as you said. You must pardon an old man's fussy ways.
He closed the connecting door and resumed his place in the right-hand corner. The hours passed. The three men dozed fitfully, waking with uncomfortable starts. Probably never before had 3 people booked berths on the most luxurious train available, then declined to avail themselves of the accommodation they had paid for. Every now and then Poirot glanced at his watch, and then nodded his head and composed himself to slumber once more. On one occasion he rose from his seat and opened the connecting door, peered sharply into the adjoining compartment, and then returned to his seat, shaking his head.
What is the matter?
Whispered Knighton.
You are expecting something to happen, aren't you?
I have the nerves.
Confessed Poirot.
I am like the cat upon the hot tiles. Every little noise it makes me jump.
Knighton yawned.
Of all the darned uncomfortable journeys.
He murmured.
I suppose you know what you are playing at, Monsieur Poirot.
He composed himself to sleep as best he could. Both he and Van Aldine had succumbed to slumber, when Poirot, glancing for the 14th time at his watch, leant across and tapped the millionaire on the shoulder.
What is it?
In 5 or 10 minutes, monsieur, we shall arrive at Lyons.
My God.
Van Aldine's face looked white and haggard in the dim light.
Then it must have been about this time that poor Ruth was killed.
He sat staring straight in front of him. His lips twitched a little, his mind reverting back to the terrible tragedy that had saddened his life. There was the usual long screaming sigh of the brake, and the train slackened speed and drew into Lyons. Van Aldine let down the window and leant out.
If it wasn't Derek, if your new theory is correct, it is here that the man left the train.
He asked over his shoulder. Rather to his surprise, Poirot shook his head.
No.
He said thoughtfully.
No man left the train. But I think, yes, I think a woman may have done so.
Knighton gave a gasp.
A woman?
Demanded Van Aldine sharply.
Yes, a woman.
Said Poirot, nodding his head.
You may not remember, Monsieur Van Alden, but Miss Grey in her evidence mentioned that a youth in a cap and overcoat descended onto the platform ostensibly to stretch his legs. I think that youth was most probably a woman.
But who was she?
Van Aldine's face expressed incredulity, but Poirot replied seriously and categorically.
Her name, or the name under which she was known, for many years, is Kitty Kidd, but you, Monsieur Van Alden, knew her by another name, that of Ada Mason.
Knighton sprang to his feet.
What?
He cried. Poirot swung round to him.
Ah, before I forget it.
He whipped something from a pocket and held it out.
Permit me to offer you a cigarette. Out of your own cigarette case. It was careless of you to drop it when you boarded the train on the Cincha at Paris.
Knighton stood staring at him as though stupefied. Then he made a movement, but Poirot flung up his hand in a warning gesture.
No, don't move.
He said in a silky voice.
The door into the next compartment is open, and you are being covered from there this minute. I unbolted the door into the corridor when we left Paris, and our friends the police were told to take their places there. As I expect you know, the French police want you rather urgently. Major Knighton, or shall we say, Monsieur le Marquis.
If you enjoy audiobooks like this, consider subscribing.